Okay, I'll let you know. I think there's these two windows, and you can never tell when you're really live.
I noticed that. I know because you go
Mm.
like, "Am I live?" And then a few seconds later, you go, "Oh, yep, I'm
Yeah.
live."
Yep. I think we're live. Okay, great. Well, everyone, thank you once again for coming on an odd day at an odd hour for this particular channel. And it's kind of an experiment when I do something like this to see who's kind of around depending on their schedule and sort of where they are in the country and where they are in the world. So thank you for showing up, everyone. I see we have a few watching now. And what we have today is someone that's usually in the live chat, and I'm honored to have her here because she is just a wealth of information. It's would you like to be one or Eileen Colts, or how do you like to be? We didn't talk about that actually.
Oh yeah, Eileen, just Eileen.
Eileen, just
Yeah.
Eileen, perfect. So, Eileen, I think one of the easiest ways I'm going to start out is I learned this from some other channels. Who's Eileen Colts? Tell me about yourself.
Oh gosh. Oh, that's like the $1 million question that people always ask first and makes people. It's like, let's start talking about me now. It's something we're not really used to doing, but my background is in mainstream media, and it's
Mm,
not something that I like advertise and put out there a lot because I have a Mandela effect and a quantum consciousness channel. I've combined the two, and I do a weekly appearance over at Shane's channel on Unbiased and on the Fence, where we follow the Lynn McTaggart Power of Eight and the heart maths methods of joining like 100 people together live to do a weekly live stream meditation intention to actually affect matter and change the world around us. And I know that my work is like yours. It's extremely cutting edge. So I don't usually talk about my mainstream media background from like 1985 to 1995. But then I'm finding people will give me more credibility if they know that I came from mainstream media, and they shouldn't. That really has nothing to do with credibility. It's kind of like we're so impressed when we see the Monroe Institute information coming out from the CIA. It gives
right.
it that extra boost of credibility, but it shouldn't. We should be able to review that information without a CIA, Defense Department seal of approval and kind of give it the credibility of like, does it stand on its own merit? Who cares what the government thinks? But we tend to give more credibility to people who work in official capacities.
Yeah, that's very well said, and that's exactly the point I make sometimes is that I'm a little disappointed myself that a lot of the things that were presented to me I knew intuitively or I'd read in other books or certainly other people that I respected. I would watch their videos and there was nothing really actually new within those 29 pages that I read with the gateway process, the CIA FOIA document that I've left in the description for anybody who's new to the channel. But I must admit, I took it one more level up in seriousness, and for me it was at first I was a bit ashamed of myself, but eventually I just came to the conclusion, just deal with it. It's something you didn't know about yourself. You thought you had conquered it, you didn't. So that's
Exactly. It's
it's a
it,
good
it
thing.
it's wired into us.
Hmm.
Actually, it's programmed into us that we
Yes.
we doubt everything that doesn't come from an official capacity.
Hmm.
Like if I tell you, oh, CBD oil really does help reduce anxiety, you're going to go, yeah, yeah, whatever. But if your doctor tells you that and goes, hey, CBD oil really does reduce anxiety, you'll be like, oh, yeah, doctor told me.
Right. Absolutely. And that was the thing was, I'm currently talking to a doctor right now, and he's a doctor of internal medicine, and I finally got him to agree to come on the show week after next, tentatively. And there's just something about that, and a lot of the changes he's going to talk about, we already know about. But again, I felt myself getting excited that a doctor of internal medicine is telling me this, and
Exactly. Like I think Michelle's opinions, she's usually in the chat. She did an interview with her doctor who's Mandela affected. But of
mhm.
course, he had to come on like, no name, no identity, no photograph, because doctors aren't willing to say. Although Shane had a doctor on too, talking to us in the chat rooms, the live streams that he does on Friday night and Saturday night,
Mhm.
also talking about Mandela effects. It's really hard for a doctor or a scientist to say, yeah, consciousness rules matter. And the more people you get concentrating on the same thing, the quicker the changes in matter occur. Now, our ruling elite know this. This is why they've been working, and they know we know this. We know they know we know that they know how to manipulate us with subliminal programming, they emotional manipulation through media, TV, movies, games. You know, there is a
Mhm,
reason
mhm,
why we always have to be kept on the edge of our seat in a constant state of fear. That's
mhm,
how
mhm.
they manipulate their control over the entire globe, if you believe it's a globe. I don't care if it's a flat plane, you know, I'm like totally open to what the shape of the earth actually is. I'm not like in one camp or the other because I haven't been up there to see it for myself. And
Well, Well, the one thing that I think about the flat earth, and I've mentioned this before, what I think makes it so significant and why they shut it down on YouTube and they're shutting it down on Facebook and all these other places is I realized it's sort of this metaphysical movement and that if you take the Monroe document and you take or the CIA document talking about the Monroe Institute, I thought about this for a minute and I thought you have a collection of people, and I use that word over and over again. They're belligerent. They will not, toe. They will not kneel. They will not kneel to the authority. And they are actually changing the vibrational frequency of the planet, the realm, whatever it is you want to call it. I almost felt as if it's an insurgency, and the flat earthers themselves may not even be aware of it on a conscious level, but they are actually changing the way in which this whatever this thing is
just call it a
it operate.
paradigm. A paradigm
Right.
is kind of like the operational system in which you find yourself. So, you know, you
Hmm.
could have a reality paradigm, you could have a religious paradigm, and you could have a computer paradigm. So, whatever this paradigm is, which is the
Hmm.
operational system in which we woke up in when we were born here, right? We just kind of, it was all here. It was all programmed
Hmm.
before we arrived.
Right. And whatever it is, they're changing it. And it was enough to where, like you said, those that are in power, they had to shut it down because it was the other day I was watching a mainstream news channel, and it was kind of a talk show, and there was the host and there was three guests sitting on the couch, and one of the guests, they were talking about somebody recently landed on the moon or they did something on the moon. I don't even really pay much attention to it anymore, unless I can detect a Mandela effect or a shift or something like that. But he said, I don't believe it. And everyone kind of gasped. And I gasped simply because it had gotten that far, and I knew it was flat earth. He didn't want to say it. He just said, I don't believe it. And it was the first time that it had leaked out to the mainstream media, which is the sort of the arm of this whole machine that's moving. And
Yeah,
I
that is
don't
kind
know
of a
where this
big
guy's.
deal. I haven't heard that on
Mhm,
mainstream media, but I don't watch a lot of mainstream media anymore because of the
mhm.
overt and subliminal programming. Like you, I don't catch it.
Right, and, it's just this one show I watch, and I actually DVR it, and I watch it every week, and because it's kind of a bit off the beaten path. Off the air, I'll let you know what it is, but the guy straight up said, "I don't believe it. I don't believe it," and it was silent. No one knew how to keep and it's kind of a comedy-based kinda thing, and, it's not something I normally watch, but it's really the only thing close to mainstream that I watch, so it took me aback. I was just kind of shocked that the guy had, because he really took his career into his own hands when he said that. Because, like I said, I think science is an economic and political movement first. I
Well,
think.
there's two possibilities. And
Hmm.
either he took his career in his hands and he was being honest, or he was told to say that. And you're going to see more.
Mm,
You'll know because in the future you'll see a little bit more slip ups. Matt over at Quantum of Conscience is great at catching all these slip ups that
hmm.
they're doing to kind of lead us down the different rabbit holes of flat Earth, Tartaria, mud
Hmm.
floods, excuse me, you know, things like
Hmm.
that. And then you have to ask yourself, was that really a slip? You
Yeah.
know, because they're very subtle. Controlled opposition and psychological operation on the population is extremely subtle. The CONOPS and PSYOPs start slowly. Otherwise, if you put them out too fast, they're rejected.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I don't know, I think the dead silence and the stoppage of like the flow of the show, maybe not, but that's a good point. They're very good at it. They've been doing it for decades. And the point I make about the gateway process, a lot of people, they don't want to look at it. It's from the CIA. It has to be lies. The point of the CIA is to maintain control. By them releasing it, for me, the way I rationalize it in my head is that they're 35 years on from what they put down on paper, and they're ready to release in a FOIA document. That means they're at
Well,
least 50 years
let's
plus.
let's
Okay.
talk about that, okay? Because
Sure, sure.
first of all, in my background, okay, I was raised in the Middle East as a Christian, and a
Okay.
little bit in the West Indies and in America. So I have this, really, really open viewpoint. But I started meditating in the 70s, and I started exploring Monroe information in the 80s, because he basically was a paranormal researcher who started a really cool institute to
Hmm.
examine consciousness. So a lot of these things that are new to the Mandela effect community um, are not new. They've been around, and we're 50 years beyond that. So if the CIA or the Defense Department actually released that one, I think if they were willing to release that, they're so far beyond that that they no longer need to keep that secret. It's like, okay, well, if we're forced to release information, let's send out the documents that start in, baby steps A. But we're already at XYZ, and we're not going to release that because we've moved on in 50 years so far from this. This is safe to release. I looked up the document dump, and it was on January 17th, 2017. So, the numbers are always significant because numerology and astrology is something that our controlling humans, our rulers, pay attention
Hmm.
to.
Hmm.
And they dumped 13 million pages. Did you know that?
Jeez. Wow.
13
No,
million
I didn't.
pages. Yeah. So that was the FOIA release. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I know that we have rules and regulations that freedom of information requests have to be addressed and released. But do you really think that our government, and I'm not painting them as baddies, this is their job, okay? They're human beings just like us. And we've put them in charge, or we've allowed them to become and put themselves in charge.
Hmm.
So, we can't always paint them as these dastardly villains that are translated as archons, Anunnaki, Satan, and demons, right? These people are not going to release anything that they consider extremely important to their intelligence, their defense operations, and their ability to control the scenario, the political scenario, the social scenario, right? So what we get is
Absolutely,
basically their
absolutely.
backwash. We're not getting the first, the real stuff.
But what's significant though, and I wholeheartedly agree, 100%. You laid out the case, and I completely, absolutely agree. Um, However, I think what I try to get across for people who are doubters about this is that I think you understand that there is a process to this, and part of that process is they want you to know on one end, and then on another end, they don't care what you know whenever you're 35, 40 years back, because you don't have the funding. You don't have the intelligence apparatus. You don't have anything that it would take to endanger them, because first and foremost, your becoming as an individual in terms of your spiritual awakening or anything like that, that doesn't threaten the immediate operational control that they have over the United States and the globe. And by them releasing this particular document, no matter how much spiritual mileage you get out of that document, as far as they're concerned, it's going to take you more than a decade, and they'll see you coming a mile away before you become a threat. And by then, they probably have another 13 million pages lined up ready for you to thwart you in any way for you to become a danger. So, as far as the limited scope that I have for what I'm trying to figure out, and I know I'm having scope creep with what I'm doing, because I originally wanted to talk about and focus on the Mandela effect, but I find myself going into all these strange alleyways that I finally have just said I want to know what the source of the truth is to all of this, because it's so much bigger now than just the Mandela effect. And now I'm starting to realize the Mandela effect itself, all it is just a side effect ultimately. It's not even the
Yeah,
real thing,
yeah.
right?
what you're doing is more important than covering the Mandela effect. And, you know, we were talking about that before the show, that when we do these kinds of things, you know, sometimes you can have some kickback from that, because any great changes in mass consciousness always start small. You know, it's always the few people who started to ask for women's votes. It was a few people who demanded an end of slavery in this country. It always starts small and then it snowballs and it gets really, really big. And then once it reaches that critical mass, everything changes. You know, you can talk about the
Yeah.
100 monkey effect, you know, but it
Hmm.
really is a critical mass level. So, what we're talking about now, the Mandela effect, is like a wake up call. You start to see things changing around you, and you're like, holy moly, how is this happening? And then the immediate monkey man, monkey woman reaction is, oh my God, I'm so scared, I'm going to go hide. You know, this is terrible. It's changing my belief system. It's threatening my view of reality. And then most people get over that and they start to realize that they're still alive. The Mandela effect didn't kill them while they were sleeping. So now they're curious and, you know, they come out. You know, it is like almost taming animals. You know, if you think about it, first you
Hmm.
have to get that animal's trust, and they've got to realize you're not going to kill them and eat them. You know, and then they start to come out and get to know you. And this is how the Mandela effect is working. People are starting to get comfortable with the concept. And then your channel is the obvious next step. Well, okay, it's here. It's not going to hurt us or kill us. So let's find out what's causing it. Why is matter changing in inexplicable ways around us? You know, and I love Cynthia C. Larson because she's been Mandela affected like me since the 90s. And she wrote a book, I think in 99, maybe 2004, I don't know, 2001, called Reality Shifters.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
yeah, when I interviewed her on Unbiased and on the Fence, we do the Power of 8 at 8, where we get together to change the paradigm into a more peaceful, cooperative, compassionate um, paradigm. We had her on, and she said she borrowed the term from one of my favorite authors, P.M.H. Atwater, even before the 1990s. So, and that woman is amazing on near death experiences, which, you know, someday I actually died and was resuscitated as a teenager. So that's kind of like a discussion for another day. But that woman who wrote the best book on what happens to consciousness when you die and they bring you back, she
Well, that's
coined the term
interesting.
reality shifters. Okay, so it's all tied together. It's all about consciousness shifting either while you're here and awake, or while you're in the dream state, or while you're dead. You know, consciousness has this ability, it is forever, it is immortal. You know, that is the part of you that cannot die. You know, that first law of thermodynamics where energy cannot be consumed, it can only be
Hmm.
transformed into another energy. Are you
Yes.
familiar with that law?
Yes.
Okay, that's your soul. You know, your soul or your spirit, that spark that is you, cannot die. It can only be transformed. And when we say transformed, we're dealing with literally consciousness shifting.
Wow. So that's something very, very interesting you said. I obviously I had an NDE whenever I had a pretty traumatic car accident whenever I was a teenager. So that is one thing that kind of binds a lot of MEs together, or
It sure
whatever we
does.
are. Yeah, and whatever we are. I don't know what we are, but my experience was a bit different than others. I don't remember a whole lot. I remember being conscious and not being in my body, but I never looked down and saw my body. I just was aware that I was not where I used to be. And I remember being very I wanted to go back. What, you know, that's, I think, because I don't know if it was my youth or whatever it was, because if I were to ever to return to that state again, I'm not entirely sure I would plead like I did before. So but I certainly wanted to go back, and I went back, but it was like 2 weeks later, but when I came to.
Were you in a
But that's,
coma?
well, they told me that they kept me under in a coma. So I wasn't in a forced coma. So it was kind of I guess they medically induced the coma because of the internal swelling I had. So that's that's what it was. And when I came to, I had a huge tube sticking out of the side of my chest. and then I had one in my mouth, and it was like, what? And it literally took weeks later, maybe even months, before I recalled that moment when I guess I was maybe dead. And then I would say it was probably a year later before I was okay with it. Like for about 6 months, even though I had still physical pain, and even to this day, I still have some physical pain from it. It took a long time to really come to grips with the fact that reductive materialism wasn't all there was. There was something else, and that very much bothered me because at that point I was very vain about being an atheist. I was very into it. It was very cool. I very much loved being that. And there was something I had to shed, and it was something I really missed, and it bothered me a lot to not be able to be an atheist. So it was
It's kind
yeah,
of
it was
funny.
traumatic. It was traumatic. Yeah.
That is kind of interesting because one of the biggest side effects of people who experience death or near death experiences is a total shift in spirituality. So
Yeah.
it's not uncommon. That's like, and then also some psychic gifts. A lot of people who experience death, which is, I'm gonna like make a differentiation between them. Death is when you're flatlined and you're not breathing,
Hmm.
and the cord that connects your consciousness to the body is cut. It's
Okay.
temporarily severed, and then they have to resuscitate you to reestablish the life force in the body, and then that cord that attaches the spirit to the body comes back. Then there's another kind of near death, which I think you might be describing, I'm not sure, and that's when you're in a suspended state of consciousness and you're in a coma. Your body is breathing, your heart is pumping, you still have that cord that attaches your life force to your
Hmm.
body, your spirit, but
Hmm.
it's not in your body. It's out there in an altered state. So, do you see the difference? Now,
Yes.
what's interesting is both people who experience a near death experience of that altered state, which my sister was in for quite some time in the ICU, she had machines breathing for her. They experience very similar, if not the same things, that people who have that cord completely cut and they are clinically dead. There's no life force in the body, there's no breathing, no respiration, no brain waves, no heartbeat. They kind of share, but the difference is, I think the difference is how far you go. I think when the life force is cut, your
Mhm.
spirit can go much further, and that's where it can experience the tunnel, the angels. You'll see Buddha or Jesus or Mary or Vishnu, whoever your idealized spiritual leaders are. You might see them. You might see dead loved ones
Yeah.
who passed before you, although people in coma see them too. So it's a
Yeah.
matter of degrees, isn't it? It's degrees of how far out our consciousness goes. Which brings me to that last interview you did, which was so awesome, with the guy who is like really knowledgeable about the occult.
Oh yes. Jeremy. Yep. Jeremy
I found that
Crow.
really, really interesting. And I was so glad that you would go there because there's too many channels that are afraid to go places based on listener response. And basically, you really need to be working with people here who are willing to look at all the options. It doesn't mean that you select one or you're going to practice one. It means you know it's out there and you know what it's all about. It's like expanding consciousness, but not necessarily deciding to take that route personally, right?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you bring it up because I want to bring it up over and over again to people that are new to this channel. The kind of mission statement. And the mission statement is, without sounding glib or cliche, it's this journey. And I don't know sort of what I'm doing. I just know this thing is real and it's here. And just like my near death experience when I was a teenager, I've had this life altering thing where I know I have to pursue it. I can't do anything else. And the beauty of YouTube and channels like this is that I get to meet people I normally don't come across. And if they have an expertise of 20 plus years, and I don't have to do that for 20 plus years, they've done it for me, like a doctor, like an occultist, like someone else. And they have a perspective that I don't understand. Why on earth would I avoid them? That's insane. That makes no sense to me. And I don't understand the fear others have. It baffles me, and I don't understand it. And it's not a point of pride for me. It's a point of I just don't understand it. So that's how
That's
I feel
probably
about
due
it.
to your near death experience. One of the side effects is coming back with a real thirst for understanding the understandable. Do you know what I mean by that? It's like,
Yes.
okay, well, who am I? Why am I here? Where do I go after I live here? And where the heck did I come from?
Hmm.
And then more importantly, what's the whole point of this?
Yes.
Why am I here? Why am I going through this motion of spirit and matter, a birth until death? And so people who tend to seek at those levels tend to not have as much fear of, no, I must not go there. Nope, that's too scary. You know, that's got the
Yeah.
D word, devils and demons, not going there. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely.
So yeah, it's kind
Yeah.
of a bravery and a quest for knowledge above the programming that we've received on where not to go. Isn't that interesting? We've been well coached and programmed for centuries and millennia not to go certain places. It's in our DNA.
Yeah, I was a little taken aback by some of the responses, and and that's fine. I understand if they don't want to take part in something like that, but it wasn't as if I was doing something deceptive. We were being right up front.
No,
Jeremy,
they were scared. They'll come back. They're going to miss it. They're going to miss what you were giving them and they'll come back. They might not like sub right away, but they'll be listening. They're probably listening right now.
well, I hope
This is
so.
how human beings work. Something scares us, we turn our back on it, and then we're like curious. Oh, well, wait a minute. I still want to know more about that, even though it scared me. Well, the reason I brought up that show is because what Jeremy was talking about was also the degrees of consciousness. So you can be in one state, and then you're sleeping and you're in a dream state. And then you learn how to lucid dream, which means you're awake while dreaming and you can now direct the dream like a director directs a movie. Okay, that is like a step in astral projecting. It's the easiest one because we dream every night. So that's the best place to test out your ability to kind of direct the show. But there are so many other levels of astral projection way beyond dreaming that have nothing to do with dreaming. They're much further out. And that's when you get into like remote viewing, that the government
Hmm.
is probably still very interested in. I'm sure they're still using remote viewers. And then there's something there are places to go even beyond that, beyond remote viewing. You know, you get
Sure.
into theta healing, and theta healing practitioners will take you through like first you've got this physical body, and all these levels have consciousness. And you can move through these different levels of consciousness, by your birthright because you're alive and you're conscious. So then you've got this etheric body, which is really kind of electrical, and it's where your thoughts reside. And then right beyond that, you have your astral body, which is quite out there. It can project quite far, and that's where all your feelings reside, and that's where your fears live. So if you're going to astral project only into your astral plane, you might see demons and aliens and scary things because that's where the astral world is where human emotions reside. But you can astral project beyond that, beyond the fear, and then you realize there's nothing scary out there. There's nothing that's going to get you. There are no demons. There are no scary aliens. As you go out further and further and further, you get into kind of safer zones, but they're really much harder to get into because they take practice.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So, talking about those particular zones and those kinds of areas. So, do you think that what Jeremy was talking about, he's actually practicing something like that himself? Whenever we talk about ritual magic, or if we're talking about different kinds of magic, I mean, there's almost just a buffet of different ways in order to. You've got chaos magic, you've got and
Sigil
the entire,
magic,
yeah, all of that is sigil,
that's logos.
exactly.
You've got
Hmm.
word magic. Yeah, okay. So my entry into metaphysics was through the occult. The first thing I studied was the occult. And why wouldn't I? Because I was young, and occult means hidden, that which is not seen. Oculus, the eye. It means you just don't see it. It's being kept from you. So there's
Hmm.
really nothing scary about the word itself. except we've been programmed probably to steer clear of anything that smacks of the occult, because those who actually control humanity, they are very well versed. They know exactly what they're doing, and they know how to do it. And why would they want every human being on the planet to know about it too? You lose you're not no longer a step ahead of people if everybody knows it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Makes
left the
sense.
occult in that I didn't find spiritual satisfaction there. It was far too messy. It was too dark. It was too scary. Who wants to work with blood and all that crap? And it was just wrong for me, because I'm much more spiritually evolved. And it just, I don't know, I don't want to say that and sound arrogant, but when you see that ritualistic stuff happening to achieve something that you can achieve through meditation, through
Mhm.
a oneness with humanity, a oneness with God, a oneness with life. So you can either go cut your finger and write on parchment at midnight and burn something to create a spell. All it's doing is evoking an emotional response in you, which gets you into the gamma waves of your brain, which is
Mhm.
between 40 and 100 hertz. It's called an excited state of the brain, which tends to manifest in matter. It tends to manifest your desires, whether they be events or material, in matter. And you've just used this really crappy, ritualistic, dark thing to get you excited. Well, other people can feel exactly the same way by counting their rosary beads. They get into a ritualistic counting of the rosary over and over and over, and they get into that gamma wave part of their brain waves, and they start to manifest their desires because they're putting their desires into the rosary beads, and their emotions are actually creating the outcome. So my point is, you can do anything. You can pray with a cross or a crystal. You can work with dark magic and work with blood and all that horrible stuff that isn't necessary. Or you can go out in nature and commune with God through nature, and you get the same result. The key to all of the different mechanisms is emotion. As soon as you get your emotions tied and stimulated first, and then tied to the desire, that's when manifestation occurs. And,
Interesting.
our
Mm.
ruling elite, they're just humans. We can't hate on them because that just creates more of the separation. They're just humans who are controlling the show here. And we've either put them there or we've allowed them into those positions. So instead of hating on them for controlling the show, just concentrate on your own abilities to control your show, which will change, their ability to manipulate, because now more of us are going to be in charge of our own lives, and we're going to do it positively. Do it through love and forgiveness and kindness, and basically the light side, and we're going to achieve the
So,
same ends. So you got two ways you can approach it, but you're still only using human emotions from the astral plane to help your mind, which is more electric, in terms of, the heart energy is more magnetic, the brain energy is more electric. You combine your thought, I want this to happen, I want this new job, and then you put your heart energy into it. Now you've charged it up with emotions. Go do a beautiful, loving ritual to symbolically encourage that manifestation.
hmm, very interesting. Okay. Yeah, that sounds very reminiscent of kind of what I mean when I talk about and this is very even though we were just talking about it, it reminds me a lot of chaos magic from what I've studied on that is its intent, and it's not really as indulgent in terms of the ritualistic side, or at least a recognized ritual, but yet it's still a part of that intent, and it's always been about intent, and that's what I mean about the flat earthers. Could they have done exactly what you just talked about by accident, by what you had just said, and they are manifesting this in the physical realm? Is that
I'm not
does that
sure.
even make sense?
It does make sense to me, which is why I'm so addicted to your show, especially your Lost and Found bin with Chick. I think the
Hmm.
two of you have an incredible dynamic in going over this stuff. It does make sense to me. And I'm not sure
Me
because if
either.
we're in a holographic, multi-dimensional simulation, okay, I'm
Hmm.
not talking about a computer simulation, there's every possibility that a God, like God or source energy, is creating the simulation, or that we, our higher selves, are creating the simulation here. It doesn't have to be something outside of us or something scary. But if it's holographic in nature and if it's multidimensional, then all those possibilities you just said could be true. We could be on a globe, we could be on a flat plane, we could be on anything that we choose to decide that we're on. And them coming in suddenly and saying, hey guys, it's flat, it's flat, it's flat, that is going to change the consensus. And the consensus might create the matter, the paradigm matter. So you might have to have a consensus in consciousness in order to get the change in matter. So if all of us suddenly are like, say, I don't know what the percentage is that's critical mass. Some people say no more than 7%, which sounds kind of low to me. But it's like the
Wow.
majority of people say the sky is green and the grass is blue. And if you keep saying that over and over and over again and people start believing it, then you're going to see a flip, you're going to see a change, and the sky is going to be green and the grass is going to be blue. If consciousness rules matter the way I've come to understand that it does. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And what I don't get too is by releasing the internet, the internet came out. It was absolutely a DARPA sort of creation, and they knew when they released it that there would be this kind of uptick in awareness from human beings. I'm surprised they didn't have a
yeah, I am too. Wasn't
right,
there
a
some
plan.
politician like in the 90s who said, hey, folks, we better get control of this or everything's going to change. We'll lose our power? Do you
Okay,
recall somebody, some famous politician, warning the government that the internet should not be released to the people?
I don't. But, I disagree with him, but in terms of having it released, but I think he was right, and I think that's what we're having happen is you have these pockets now of if you are to take the CIA document as absolute doctrine. I consider it a grimoire at this point. I'm not gonna consider it like, kind of a Bible, but I certainly consider it a magical, powerful treatise, so to speak. And I think that we have these pockets that are incredibly powerful frequency pockets, and they are emanating like never before in human history because of the internet. And we have yet to really settle. And why it didn't happen with the television age was because, like you said, the ruling elite, whatever you want to call them, there's a million names for them. They had control immediately, and if anything, it helped stratify the population and further kind of direct the population the way that they wanted to go. This
Sure.
thing here, yeah, but just by the clampdowns. What they're actually doing is solidifying, and they're actually showing by default there is something to flat Earth. There is something to whatever they're clamping down on. They're showing whether they want to or not. It's
Well, I
almost a
noticed a
catch
change in that
22.
too. I noticed a change in that over the 2 years that I've been actively watching the Truther channels and the Mandela Effect channels and some of the Flat Earth channels.
Mm,
Um, it's like if they clamp down, it immediately gives it the seal of approval. Wow, this stuff must be true. So now they're starting to clamp down and release the controlled opposition as well, because
mhm,
otherwise they ruin the street cred of the controlled opposition. So you'll often, it gets very confusing, and the lines are now blurred as to
mm.
what is credible and what isn't, because they know that if they don't attack their own controlled opposition channels, they will be found out as being con op. So it's kind of murky, and I'm not
It
sure that Flat Earth wasn't put out as kind of a psyop, as well as Tartaria, as well as mud floods. I'm
oh,
not
oh,
sure about that. I don't know whether it was naturally and organically grew or whether it was seeded.
And let me say to everyone in the audience, in no way am I endorsing flat Earth or Tartaria or any of that. However, I do think that it's one of two things. It's either what I said it was, it's a belligerent movement that has formed now its own almost autonomous frequency that threatens to take over the presiding frequency of whether or not we're on a ball or not, or and then you can put any or Tartaria or any of that, or it was
Or
there in
Q,
another dimension.
or
Right, or
Q.
cute. Right, right.
Yeah.
Any of that stuff.
But the
Any
one
and
thing they all have in common is that there are people that used to be called conspiracy theorists who are now called truthers. And the one
Mhm.
thing they all have in common is they distract the truthers. They suck us down these endless rabbit holes without end, which are fun. It's really fun to explore this stuff. So I don't mind
Mhm.
going down rabbit holes, I really enjoy them. But then I soon realized there's no end to this. It's a bottomless pit. Crawl back out and then find the next rabbit hole. When really what we need to be focusing on, do the rabbit holes on the side for fun instead of mainstream media as your entertainment, but focus on developing your own individual power of consciousness over your own individual life, which is your matter, your relationships, your home, your work, your car, your friendships, that's where we need to focus our energy, is increasing our individual ability to use our consciousness to control our matter. And then do the rabbit holes for fun, because they're not really tied to increasing your personal power, are they? They distract you. They
Mhm.
stop you from looking at things that might increase your individual personal power here in this paradigm or matrix.
That's a good point. I like that. Now let me ask you the thing about Tartaria, even though it could be another rabbit hole. I'd always had this weird feeling about Tartaria or Mud Flood or any of those things. They just came out of nowhere. A lot of people they claim psyop, but they're not really vested in the Mandela effect like I am, and like a lot of people in around this channel. I had always thought perhaps it was a Mandela effect, like this.
It could
Tartaria could have
be.
been a cut. Right, right.
It could be a
That's what I
psyop.
thought.
It could be a piece of history that we never looked at, and now we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at it. Or it could
Mm-hmm.
be a psyop, or it could be a Mandela effect. It's like impossible to prove what the origin is of some of these things. But do you know Robert Seffer's channel?
I think I've seen or heard Robert Seffers. Is he the guy who does the history that's like really uncommon or something?
Yeah, he's an archaeologist who does hidden
Okay.
history videos. Fascinating. He also does Atlantean Gardens, which is more like metaphysical, but the same videos wind up going on both of his channels anyway. And he
Okay.
looked at Tartaria from a purely like scientific, historical, archaeological viewpoint, and
Okay.
he's finding that they were Celts. Now, this is what's fascinating to me, and not just because I have Celtic blood, a lot of it, which made me more interested in studying the Celts. But when I was working in the Czech Republic, it was still Czechoslovakia then, it was before they split.
Mm-hmm.
I read the
Mm-hmm.
history. I always, I worked in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and the United States. I always read the history of where I am. And of course, the victors always write the history. So you're always getting you're not getting an unbiased story there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fascinated to find out that the Celts from Ireland and Scotland, quite different from the Britons, ruled Western Europe and Eastern Europe. I'm like, how the heck did they get all the way down here? And this was like in the years, like I'm going back in my head. I could be totally wrong in remembering the numbers. I think it was around 500 AD, 600 AD, 700 AD, and they ruled like Eastern and Western Europe for many, many centuries. And then I'm living in Florida, semi-retired, no longer doing media anymore, and I find out that they unearthed like 200 skeletons from a bog. I didn't know like swampy bogs preserve stuff. And they sent these to the secretive Smithsonian Institute, where they tested their DNA and found out they were 20,000 years old and they were Celts.
Mm.
I'm like, what? Because that predates the 15,000 years ago, the Mongolian Eastern nomads walked across the frozen Bering Strait and became Native American Indians, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you had
Right.
Celts here 5,000 years before. And they kind of said, hey, that's going to mess up a lot of politics and history. So they just kind of buried that information. So my point is, when I hear Robert Seffer say, actually, the rulers of Tartaria were kind of an Eastern Mongol Celtish or Celtish, if you want to use the correct terminology, mix who
Hmm.
ruled most of the globe, I'm like, yeah, I can buy into that because, you know, 20 years ago in Czechoslovakia, the Celts were ruling down there 1,000 years ago. And then here in Florida, the Celts were here 20,000 years ago. So I could see that there was like perhaps another empire ruling most of the developed world that was not emanating from, well, you can't really say the Middle East, but you must realize that our entire religious structure in the West, all of it comes from the Middle East. You know, that's
Hmm.
where Judaism comes from, that's where Christianity comes from, that's where Islam comes from. So we say that we're Western, and often our DNA goes back to Scandinavia, Europe, Ireland, Germany, all over the place, or, you know, South America, Asia, but our religious dominant religions come from the Middle East. So that's an unusual mix as well. And if you track the current bankers, they're an odd mix of Christians turned Jews from current day Georgia, which was the Khazars. So, you know, you've got this odd mix of ruling elite. And it's always interesting to see, well, where, from, according to the DNA, where did your ruling elite come from? You know,
Hmm.
and then you'll find out more about their religious beliefs, which will help you understand their current political beliefs when you get into who they are, where they came from, you know.
Hmm. So that's interesting. And I know that. Are you familiar with Anatoly Fomenko?
I am, but I think I'm familiar with that name from your channel.
Hmm. Yeah, he's a Russian mathematician, and he absolutely destroys in a I think it's a 7-part series of books, and only about three or
Oh, the
four of the book.
timeline. He changed our
Yes,
timeline, doesn't he?
yes, he
I,
absolutely
I read
destroys.
I read
Yes.
bits of it that completely shows you where the Roman emperors completely messed with our timeline because they wanted to like secede and take over power at a certain date. So they would just like add or erase decades from our timeline.
Well, it's 1,000 years, and they inserted 1,000 years, and part of the problem was what we have now as the modern day, like papacy in the Vatican. The idea is to insert 1,000 years, so it gives Christianity or Christendom a bit more of a lead time on Islam, so that way you can solidify the European idea of or the Western idea of Europe and being Western and being and that way it gives it more of a patina to it. It makes it more more
Substantial.
regal, right?
Yeah.
Regal and substantial. And that's the idea behind it. And that it was much more recent and very, very pagan. And that even the idea of the scientific tools that they claim that work, he even he destroys those tools, everything, carbon dating, all of it. And we're talking, we could be, instead of we're in, just take 1,000 years off. So we actually, rather than being in 2019, we could be in 119 or 1019. And this
Exactly.
other
But
thousand,
when you look at it deeper and you go, well, what does it matter? Does it matter whether we're in 2019 or 1019 when
I don't
that
care.
number is meaningless in the true history of the earth and humanity? You know, that number is just, it was given to us by somebody who decided to start counting time in the current era from the birth of Christ, right?
Absolutely. And that's part of this channel's tradition, at least that and it's just my life tradition, is I absolutely, because of the power of now, I stay in the present, and I consider, I don't consider the future ever, and the past, um, only because of the Mandela effect. And now am I even considering the past, because I can't really prove the past. I can't do anything about the past.
Our
However, the
past is
man,
so constructed for us.
yes, it
All these
is.
stories, maybe he's right, Anatoly. And, I wish I was better with remembering names because I've actually seen, is that the same guy who has like a channel and does the videos on it as well, or just the book, the author and the books?
No, the author is very elusive, and even there's a lot of his books, they're not even translated, so you can't even get them in English. You'd have to learn Russian or get someone to translate them for you. But he
Because
does
there's a
have a
Russian
couple.
channel on YouTube that covers all this, and I'll try to dig it
Oh,
up and send it to you.
okay, great. Yeah, yeah.
And they
So,
do it in English video. So the whole point is this is all handed to us. This is our preconceived history.
mhm.
And when we're born, the slate has been wiped clean and we're completely open to whatever they want to tell us is the truth, including the history.
And but he takes all of Western history and he boils it down to three sources. And I don't remember all three of the guys, but there are three sources, and all of Western antiquity. It is all boiled down to three sources, and his conclusion is that it's all made up, all of
Yeah.
it,
And
absolutely all of it.
science has gone the same way. Coincidentally, a viewer sent me a video yesterday that I sent you late last night, and 6 minutes into this older documentary on the true power of consciousness over matter. It looks like it's like
Mhm,
20 years old, I'm guessing. 6 minutes in, it kind of discloses that there was a very famous scientist in London who came out in 1957 and wrote a letter of complaint to the media, to all of his colleagues, and said, there is a great global conspiracy to bury any scientific studies and reports and thought that demonstrates the power of consciousness over matter. That's 1957. And this guy was really famous. And I'm sure that ended his career, if not his
oh,
life.
oh yeah, no
So
doubt.
that's 6 minutes into this documentary. So take a look at that. And then it goes on with the scientists who were involved in consciousness studies talking about what they found in terms of the power of human consciousness over the material matrix it finds itself in. That's the key, guys. Enjoy the Tartaria, enjoy the rabbit holes and the history changes, and enjoy exploring flat Earth versus round Earth. But the actual key, if you want to experience um, maybe a more positive Earth, if you're coming, because I think humans in general are positive, loving creatures by nature. And I think that our rulers are oppressive by nature because that's how the system has evolved. Not because there's like these, 10% of the humanity is evil and now they're controlling 90% of humanity. No, it's a systematic problem. It's how the system has rewarded certain individuals through certain actions. For instance, the greedier you are, right,
Mhm.
the more power you get. And the more power you get, the more money you get. But to get the power and the money, you have to do sometimes diabolical things to your friends and colleagues. So it's a systematic problem that rewards the worst in humanity with the most material gain. So, are the people evil perpetrating it, or is the system evil that creates the people to perpetrate it? If the system's still carrying on like this in 100 years, everybody doing it now is dead. So it's a systematic problem. The system is evil. The system has the problem, not necessarily, just the people in it. And
That's
that's where,
awesome.
yeah, that's where it's important that we focus on, okay, look at that and get involved and do a protest and sign a petition. I went down all those routes. But if you want to change the world and change humanity, you have to change your life. You have to change the way you think. You have to change the way you operate. And then that catches on and it seeds human consciousness. And everybody around you, subliminally, they pick up on it. And then they start doing it. And then eventually it reaches the critical mass. And then more people are taking responsibility for their lives than ever before. And the goodness in them will come out in a new system. The system will have to change if the people change.
So that scientist, I see it. Is it the Great Year? Is that the link?
Oh, no, that one's really good. If you want to explore, the possibility that the Mandela effect is caused by a binary twin sun. You're going
Okay.
to love that, because
Okay.
that's
Awesome.
basically a possible cause of the Mandela effect, and it's full of scientists talking about the fact that it's more likely that we do have a binary twin. I think traditionally it's been called nemesis,
Right.
or the blue kachina, with the blue kachina, red kachina in the Hopi myths.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's on a 26,000 year trajectory around an ellipsoid around our sun. And as it gets closer, time speeds up, because everything starts moving faster. And of course, as it gets closer, it has a great impact on the magnetic shield being scattered, which causes a rise in the Schumann resonance, which causes, a pole flip, or a pole drift, or a
Yeah.
pole shift,
Which is happening.
which, yeah, which causes the Mandela effect. All this stuff could be easily tied together. So that's just one possible cause. I have like many. I haven't decided on one. I don't know if I ever will.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Well, I try to keep the show to an hour. I want you back on. This was
I'd love to come
incredible.
back on.
Yes, this was an incredible conversation. Um, we went places I didn't expect,
Me
and saying
too.
that,
I was all
right?
prepared to talk about the Mandela effect.
I
Isn't
know,
it
right?
funny that that's like the one thing we didn't talk about?
I know, I know. Well, it's kind of good because again, I started strictly with the Mandela effect, and somehow I find myself talking to incredibly interesting people who really don't have a lot to do with the Mandela effect, but somehow are helping me understand what it is I'm experiencing. So, I ultimately, one of the things that I've learned to do is stop resisting. So I just kind of go with it now.
Me too.
And yeah, I don't resist anymore. Resistance really is futile, and that's more than a bumper sticker or a saying from a show. It really is. So I just go with it now. So I
That
don't,
means you're not afraid, because resistance is fear. If you fear
yeah,
something, you resist it because you really don't want to have to deal with it. And if you're
right.
non-resistant, you're just open. You're not fearful. You're like, okay, well, let's see where this leads. What am I going to learn
Mm-hmm.
from this?
Mm-hmm.
But I would
Well,
love to come on and talk to you about the geological changes. This is what brought me and Vanessa Va together. We do have a book. I'm going to put a plug in it, coming out in a couple of months.
sure, go
That
for it.
it's with Vanessa, who you know very dearly, and Spirit Walker, Paulo, Pinto, and Shane Robinson from Unbiased on the Fence. And it's 4 Mandela effect perspectives on the causes and the possible outcomes of the Mandela effect. Interestingly, we all have one thing in common, which you have in common, and that's the optimistic outlook that the Mandela effect is only a starting point. That is an awakening of, hey, matter is not performing the way I was told it would perform. Why? What's causing matter to shift and change and pop and flip and flop? And that is the great question, because that changes everything. If consciousness rules matter, then anything is possible here, and everything is possible here.
Absolutely. And that is a great way to end the show. Everybody, it's one, and then in parents, Eileen Colts, or look up Eileen Colts Mandela Effect. There's links to her channel in the description, as well as what I thought we were going to talk about, but we went off in some cooler place anyway. But yeah, there's some
I'm here
NASA.
every Saturday night. I'm in the live chat with you guys. It's home. It's my second home here.
So there you go. And everybody, please check out the channel. And when the book comes out, check that out. Obviously, Vanessa, check her channel out. I talk about her all the time, though. But
I love
anyway,
Vanessa.
yeah, she really is great. So that's it, everybody. This is like I said, it was something that kind of came up, and I just went for it. And I hope you guys,
Thank
I hope you
you.
enjoyed it. Yep.
Thanks for
And
inviting me on.
thank you so much. All right, guys. See ya.